Strange Destinations, the show where innovators share the tales of the accidents, the inspirations and the connections which led them to create their own unique paths. I'm your host, Dan O'Grady, co-founder of Simpatico, and this show is brought to you by Silicon Beach Radio. Now a quick word from our sponsors.
Silicon Beach Radio, proudly sponsored by Allied Legal, legal advisors to innovative businesses. MYOB, business software that sets you up for success. Victory Offices, flexible workspace solutions, premium serviced offices, co-working, lounge space, virtual office and meeting spaces.
Welcome to Strange Destinations. I'm your host Dan, and I'm here today with Marshall Hughes from Passel. Welcome, Marshall.
Thank you very much, Dan. How are you?
Very well. Yourself?
Very well, thank you.
What have you been up to in this last week?
Last 2 weeks, I've just come back from China, Ireland, Northern Ireland, and the Netherlands. So I've been taking Passel to the world.
Passel to the world. So yeah. You've delivered it back home.
I've delivered it safely back home. Delivered a little trophy back home, if I may just put that one out there. We came second in the Jiangsu Province, Victoria 40th anniversary startup competition.
Congratulations.
So that was a bit daunting. I don't speak very much Mandarin and we were pitching in English, but there was a live translation and my deck had been translated into Mandarin. So they either think that I'm talking about deliveries or they think that I'm talking about something completely different. I'm not sure.
And was that quite a challenge to, pitch in that kind of environment where you're dealing with translation to an audience who don't actually understand potentially the words that are coming out of your mouth?
It was, but the whole thing was organised by City of Melbourne and a group called ACASE, which is the Australia Chinese Association of Scientists and Entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. And there was 15 startups went, and we were very, very well taken care of. It was an all expenses paid trip. We had translators with us. The deck was translated in advance. The thing was bigger than the Logie, so it was a massive event, but it wasn't like I was sort of going there, with a backpack and a microphone trying to pitch. It was very well looked after. Fantastic.
And it's probably a good time for you just to share a little bit about Passel and what Passel is and the problem you're solving for the world.
The short version. The problem is that when people are shopping online, about 7 out of 10 of those people will abandon the shopping cart. Mm-hmm. And about half the time that's because freight is too expensive or too slow. So they're not happy with the shipping options. So to fix that, we've created Passel, which is a service where shoppers deliver on their way home to shoppers. Mm-hmm. So really quickly, so someone's shopping online, they see guaranteed 3-hour delivery in the cart. That's us. Our retail customer gets that ready in the local store. And we have people who are called passers who are just regular shoppers. We are not the Uber for couriers. It's just regular people who are out shopping or work in retail. And we've got some smarts that we're working on with Swinburne Uni where we find the person who is most likely to be travelling that journey already. So typically on their way home. We send them a message and say, hey, would you like to make a few extra dollars on your way home and deliver this to your next door neighbour?
Okay.
And they do, and that's Passel.
Great. And so where did that idea come from?
So my background is I've worked in freight for about 25 years. Used to run a company called Myfreight, which is a freight management company and a freight management system, software company based in Ringwood in Melbourne. And one of the big changes over the last 25 years has been the explosion of home deliveries powered by online. And no one does it very well. Deliveries either take a long time or they're really expensive. Yeah. And sometimes expensive isn't very well done either. No. Most people who listen to this will quickly be able to identify a time when they've been dissatisfied with a delivery from a retailer. And the logistics is a classic supply and demand problem that you either have too many drivers or not enough drivers. Yeah. Not enough drivers leads to bad service, and too many drivers leads to high rates. And the idea behind Passel is that we don't worry about the drivers, the delivery people, until the demand is generated. So our passers don't have to activate an app. They don't have to give us their availabilities and they're not penalised for saying no. So we just basically look at, there's a whole bunch of people in the shopping centre. They all have to go home. Let's get them to do a delivery.
And so how long has it taken from having that initial idea to getting it to where it is today?
Yeah, so I originally had the idea, what are we now, we're 2019, probably 6 years ago. And I almost remember sitting around with my co-workers at Myfreight saying that the time will come when, we don't get professional drivers to do deliveries, we just get people going home. And to be honest, I thought that someone else either had already done it or would already do it.
Yeah.
And then I had a bit of a early midlife crisis in 2016 and sort of pulled the pin on the industry and thought I'd go and do something completely different.
Yeah.
And that lasted about 3 months. So I'm actually I'm supposed to be right now training people how to use email better. That's actually my supposed to be job. I actually own the franchise in Australia for a group called Email Handyman.
Right.
So if anyone has any problems out there with email, I can help them. But it's one of those lifestyle jobs, that looks, maybe I'll work 2 days a week and spend the rest of the time with my kids. But I realised that I had something else to prove. So I got into the Founder Institute, which is essentially, it's run out of the US, but they have about 200, sub-branches around the world, where they basically take people who say, I think I want to be a startup founder. And they take you through a 12 to 16-week course where they test whether or not you really do want to be a startup founder or not. And of the 30 people who started, only 6 of us made it to the end.
Okay.
And which is pretty typical of a cohort.
Quite grueling then.
Oh, it's funny because the whole idea is they give you 50 hours a week work to prepare you for having your own startup. And I thought, 50 hours a week sounds like a lot until I actually had my own startup when I realised that was a bit light on.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It seems like...
it's just insane. It becomes, I think, if you've got other founders listening, it just becomes all-encompassing. I was literally up at 3:45 this morning just because I was frustrated with myself that yesterday I didn't finish my mail out of my blog post about the trip. And I was looking at my diary for today and I thought if I don't get it done before breakfast, it won't happen.
Yeah.
At 3:45, laptop on and back to work.
Yeah. So how do you deal with managing your time? Do you have a system that you follow or is it just kind of task to task?
I'm really pretty good. I've got 5 kids ranging from 18 months to 19 years and obviously in various stages of being home and not being home and spending some time with other family members and whatever else. So I think you have to be, parents are usually pretty good at time management. Although I like to talk about energy management as opposed to time management. You can have all the hours in the day, but there's some things that I think most people do really well in the morning. So I have a morning routine around getting the kids ready. Typical day, get up in the morning at 5, go for a run, back by 6:30, shower, kids breakfast, everyone off to school. And then at my co-working space, the Frankston Foundry in Frankston, usually by 8:30-ish. And then I've got like sort of a 3-hour routine that I try and go through till lunch. And then the second half of the day, sort of whatever targets of opportunity come up.
Yeah. And I think that's actually a really good point that you make around the distinction between time management and energy management. I know for myself, I've found even just transitioning my thought about what's the best allocation of my energy and resources rather than my time, I can get more done or at least minimize stress around the deadlines I create for myself.
Yeah, exactly. And there's some things that then if you do them at the wrong time, they just take more time. And for me, it's bookkeeping, which I'm still doing myself. And I know that if I don't get it done Monday, it'll end up getting done Friday afternoon before I'm supposed to be going home for dinner. And what should be a 45-minute to an hour task ends up taking 3 hours because there might be someone having a couple of beers or there might be something else going on. So there's a fair bit of discipline required. And I'm not, I'll have various weeks when I'm good at it or I'm not good at it. I think the goal, I think with anyone who's solo, which I effectively am at the moment, is to try and get the really important stuff done. And the other stuff the bookkeeping can drag, right? I've got 3 months to do my BAS and just make sure that usually it's commitments to other people that we have to get done first.
Yeah.
Try and get that done and then take care of everything else fills in the gaps.
Yeah. And now, like you said, you're kind of effectively a solo entrepreneur. Was this something that you envisioned yourself doing in the past, or is it, the idea came to you a few years ago and you decided to pursue it?
So I would have said 10 years ago, I had no visions or intentions of doing anything but just working. I was chief operating officer of the company I worked for. I was pretty happy. I could see myself doing that for the next 20 or 30 years. But we had the opportunity. So what happened with my old company is that the software provider we were using got really bad. They were a hosted solution that went down regularly. They were ridiculously expensive. So I convinced the directors of Myfreight to go and build our own solution. And that sort of took me out of my sort of middle management, small business mindset into the big bad world of tech. Yeah. And I met this company called DIUS, D-I-U-S, which is a Melbourne-based software house, and started talking to people about innovation and all these other things going on. I did what most people did. I read the 4-Hour Work Week, the Lean Startup, and a few of those things. And I think those sort of things opened my mind to what was possible. And that's probably helped sort of germinate the seed of what Passel has become.
Yeah.
But if there's, in an alternate universe, I'm still sitting at the chair, running Myfreight, completely and blissfully happy. And obviously better off financially than I am as well. But it's basically being opened up to a whole new way of thinking, which a few software people and a few sort of more excited people were able to do for me.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I like that thought of that alternate universe where Marshall's still sitting there in the office in that other role. It's quite a unique
way. My wife
way
likes that thought as well. She likes it. I was on a pretty good wicket at my old job, so there were some certain things that we had that we no longer have. Yeah, that way.
And what about when you were younger? When you were a child, what were the kind of things that you were fascinated by then?
I am there is a typical entrepreneur story, and I don't follow it. I'm a space nut. And I love space, and I've been, in the Mars Society and those things, but I have no scientific or maths background, no aptitude for that. What's the word when you coast? I coasted through high school.
Yeah.
I got into a pretty good business and international trade degree. I dropped out after 18 months and went and sold cars. The way I got my job at Myfreight was I sold a car to the guy who owned the company. We got along really well. I basically, from a career point of view, I just coasted from high school, probably from 18 until essentially 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah.
There is no, Marshall, you've read the stories about the founders who were doing stuff as kids and they were selling stuff out of selling lemonade and whatever else. I have none of those stories whatsoever. It just never occurred to me. I don't think my upbringing was entrepreneurial. My mum was a nurse. We lived in a very middle-class suburb where a lot of public servants, a lot of teachers. So there wasn't much of a business exposure.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably typical. I'm 45, so I think it's not atypical of people my age who grew up in middle-class Australia at the time that there wasn't necessarily an entrepreneurial mindset. And there's obviously differences in that. So, yeah, it just and then, and it really only, even the whole Myfreight thing when we went into the software, it wasn't by design. It was essentially that the company we were using broke and we had a problem, we had to solve it. So then that prompted the entrepreneurial thinking, for want of a better term.
Yeah, not by default, but just to kind of happen out of circumstance rather than.
Yeah, I'm comfortable in saying that the first time I took control of my career was probably July 1, 2016, which was the day after I quit Myfreight.
Okay.
That was probably the first time when I actually, and that's, what was I then, 42, 43? Yep. That was the first time I actually sat down and said, okay, what do I want to do with the next 10 or 15 years? And then it's like, oh shit, I used to have shares and I used to have a weekly income, and now what do I do? So it's probably taken me another 2 years to figure out, where we're going with Passel as well. So, but that's all right. I'm going to live for another 50 or 60 years. There's still time to figure that out.
And was there much of a kind of shift in your thinking just around your role and how you live, going from a corporate role to entrepreneurship and working for yourself and having to make all the decisions?
It sort of grows over time. Initially, so the advantage of the Founder Institute course is that it sort of gives you a framework to build your startup on. It takes you through things like idea validation, structure. You go through all those things. So I had really good guidance on that. I had really good advisors and mentors very early, which is an advantage of middle-aged white male privilege. So, there's people around me. One of our earliest investor is the Chief Operating Officer of ActivePipe, which is quite a substantial email real estate program. So I got really lucky having that existing network of people I'd known for 20 years.
Yeah.
And essentially then what happened is that you just basically grow, the complexity grows, and I believe I've grown with the complexity.
Mm-hmm.
Although there's probably enough people out there who think maybe I haven't. But I think, as things have got more complex, I've gotten better at making decisions and knowing what's going on.
Okay. And where have you, I guess, drawn inspiration from or influence from outside of your kind of immediate sphere?
So my sphere's grown. So I've probably sort of sucked in a lot of just by osmosis of thinking. So I mentioned I'm at the Frankston Foundry, which is a co-working space in Frankston. And there are 20 or 30 people out here now who are all doing a whole bunch of different things from a whole bunch of different backgrounds.
Yep.
So that's been quite advantageous. I've met a few people along the way, as you do, who I've liked more than other people and I've spent more time with them. There's a group going around called Melbourne Silicon Beach.
Yes.
Which, is that where we met?
That's where we met.
There you go. Also, well, there's the case in point. Melbourne Silicon Beach is probably the peak startup body in Victoria at this stage. From point of view of the value that they add to people who are involved in it, and the little that they ask of their members. I've made some good friends through that and had some good feedback. Also, we're in retail, and retail is a constantly moving challenge. And I've found really good support from people within the industry, because I don't know anything about retail, but I know a lot about freight. So I found a lot of people within retail have been able to sort of come to me and help out.
Yeah.
And the Founder Institute, again, I'm not, don't want to pump their tires up too much, but because we're funded, we sort of got into a higher level cohort where, my friends are now people who run startups in Canada, Finland, Croatia. And we could sort of draw on each other from there, because startup challenges are pretty universal, or even though the culture might be different in different areas.
And in terms of the difference in culture, you mentioned, you've just come back from overseas. Could you pinpoint any particular differences between, startup culture here, particularly, around Melbourne, as opposed to, the places in Europe you are in?
And obviously I've only had a sort of a shallow dip into the other countries. But one thing, look, if you look at the Dutch and the Irish, they are by nature entrepreneurial, outward-looking people. The Irish diaspora is more. There's more people on Duolingo at the moment learning Irish than there are people who speak Irish. Like it's one of those things where they're always looking out. And the Dutch, you just have to look at things like ING, and they're a global. For a small country with 20 million people, they're globally dominant. They're very, very outwardly looking. And in my experience, and with due respect and apologies to everyone in Australia, a lot of Australian startups and a lot of Australian businesses are focused on this market. There's a lot of stuff around the land, around this market. There's a lot of stuff around fintech and finance that's around this market. And it's more often that I come across Australian startups are looking at the Australian market as being the target, rather than being global. And I think that's something that you don't find somewhere like Ireland or in the Netherlands. And again, that could just be the people I hang out with, right? But that's my impression. The Chinese, they're a bit unique. There's 1 billion consumers. There's 250 million people moving into the middle class in the next 7 years. So they've got, when they're inward looking, they're looking at a market that's pretty much as big as the rest of the world. Yeah. But even with that in mind, the people in Nanjing, where we were visiting, are building a Sino-Australian industrial park and encouraging Australian startups to come to China and work with them. And so even though they've got that massive domestic market, they're still thinking globally. Yeah. Which is what, without getting political, I'm amazed that the Americans are trying to take them on in a trade war. It's like 2,600 years of history. You're going to lose this at some stage. The Chinese got you covered. But that's obviously. I've been to Ireland a few times, but that was my first visit to the Netherlands and my first visit to China. So I could be completely wrong about those countries.
Mm-hmm. So you're looking at expanding Passel internationally over the next.
We've got to. The Australian population, 25 million. The retail market is too small for us to be able to grow to the scale I want to grow us to. Mm-hmm. The vision at Passel is the 7.6 billion potential people who could be doing deliveries. retail is the starting point for us because it's quite easy.
Yeah.
If you envisage a shopping centre and there's 10,000 people there, they all have to go home. So you've got sort of the hub, and then you've got the spokes, which is everyone going home. We can do those deliveries. We want to expand into medical, into cars, potentially into services. I'm not a big fan of the gig economy, which is what we've got when we were promised the sharing economy.
Mm-hmm.
You've got this economy now where people have become dependent upon large global startups for their income and their livelihood, and I don't like that. So the pathway for us will be probably Ireland, the UK, Europe, and then US, because the US is a big game as well. The Chinese thing's a bit different. We might they're pretty keen on AI R&D, which is something we might partner with. Then there's some machine learning stuff that goes on the back end of Passel. There might be an opportunity there as well, but we see ourselves global and just happened at the moment to be based in Frankston.
Right, yeah. Well, Frankston is, centre of the known world, depending on where you're looking from.
Well, Dan, in an infinite universe, everywhere is the centre of the universe.
That's what I was alluding to. So there you go. Well, I think that's a fantastic place for us to finish up our chat, Marshall.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm looking forward to seeing where you take this. It's exciting.
Thanks for coming on the show, and I'm glad we've managed to catch up with you in this parallel part of your universe as opposed to your corporate life. It's a very interesting one you've ended up in. So if people want to learn more about Passel, what are the best ways for them to connect?
Yeah, just the website. Everything's on the website. Just PASSEL, Passel, passel.com.au, or Google Passel and you'll find us.
Okay, I'll put that in the show notes for everyone. So thanks for coming on the show.
No, thank you very much.
Great. So everyone, thanks for listening to Strange Destinations. The show is brought to you by Silicon Beach Radio, which was so wonderfully plugged by Marshall earlier, and by Simpatico. So thanks for listening. Cheers.